The heart of humanism. For those who are familiar with the humanist movement, this may sound like a contradictory title. After all, humanism is known for its commitment to rationality, a philosophy or religion of the mind, more so than the heart. But I submit to you that the high ideals expressed in humanism, the commitment to truth and to looking to the future more so than the past, these have a strong pull on the heart, too. In many ways, humanism embodies enduring features of Unitarianism and Universalism. And even as it continues to evolve, humanism remains highly relevant to the challenges of our day. Today, I take up a question one of our members recently posed. What is the role of humanism in Unitarian Universalism? It's a good question, for historically, humanism is closely tied to our tradition. It's tied to this very congregation, which has been the host since 2000 to the Humanists of Fort Worth, a group founded by Westside's emeritus minister, Russell Elevin. Now, what do we mean by humanism? Writing about the shifting theological currents in Unitarian Universalism, or UUism, my colleague Jay Atkinson observes, nearly every discussion of humanism is hampered by a multiplicity of conflicting or overlapping meanings and nuances that have been attached to the word. In the context of humanism in UU churches, Atkinson distinguishes three uses of the word that are most often encountered today. I find these useful for our exploration of the role of humanism in our tradition. They are inclusive humanism, agnostic humanism, and exclusive humanism. The first way the term humanism is used comes from its root of human, affirming and emphasizing the fundamental and intrinsic dignity, meaning, and value of human life. Atkinson notes that humanism in this broad and positive sense is to be contrasted with the anti-humanistic doctrines of original sin, total and intrinsic depravity, and bondage of the will. He calls this inclusive humanism, because virtually every other meaning of the word humanism includes this basic conviction that there is fundamental dignity and value in human life. In this sense, Unitarianism has been humanist since its beginnings, distinguishing itself then, in the early days, from other forms of Christianity by its belief in the innate goodness of human beings and our ability to act morally. Our religious forebears rejected the Calvinist doctrines that were so pessimistic about humanity and opted for a program of salvation by character. A second way the term humanism might be understood is in the way that it was preached by those Unitarian ministers who helped give birth to the humanist movement of the 20th century. John Dietrich, for example, wasn't interested in talking about God, either positively or negatively, but preferred to step around such questions, speaking to humanity's position in strictly ethical and secular terms. Atkinson calls this agnostic humanism. Dietrich's attitude has long characterized Unitarians and Universalists. We put more emphasis on character and will as the fruits of religion than on belief. What counts is how we live, deeds, not creeds. This agnostic humanism was not an approach that required declarations of either theism or atheism. The role or nature of God, or whether there was a God, was beside the point. The third meaning of the term humanism in a UU context, Atkinson calls exclusive humanism. This is a humanism that is definitively atheistic or non-theistic, but favors the name humanism in order to communicate something about what it is for, rather than what it discards or rejects. The humanism that has grown up beyond our tradition is identified more squarely with exclusive humanism, but it is not uncommon for UUs also to use the term humanism as a synonym for atheism or rejection of supernatural concepts. The humanist movement that grew out of Unitarianism offered a distinctive voice. In the concluding statement of the first Humanist Manifesto, set forth in 1933, you can hear the tone of optimism and determination. It says, "Though we consider the religious forms and ideas of our fathers no longer adequate, the quest of the good life is still the central task for mankind. Man is at last becoming aware that he alone is responsible for the realization of the world of his dreams, that he has within himself the power for its achievement. He must set intelligence and will to the task." Humanism would be criticized as an overly sunny outlook, and indeed its own leaders wrestled with the unfolding events of the world after that first manifesto. From the rise of Nazism and other totalitarian regimes to inhumane wars, abuses of power, and the misuse of science for evil. 40 years later, in 1973, when a second Humanist Manifesto was issued, its preface acknowledges that events since the publishing of the first Humanist Manifesto make that earlier statement seem far too optimistic. The understandings and commitments of humanism continue to evolve, with a third manifesto appearing in 2003. By that time, the manifesto was far less tied to our UU tradition. But religious humanists within our tradition have made their contributions to helping continue to refine a humanist philosophy. William Murray, for example, a UU minister and a former president of Meadville Lombard Theological School, my alma mater, worked to bring religious humanism into the 21st century with his 2007 book on reason and reverence. In it, he expressed greater humility, wonder, and a sense of humanity's place in the wider web of nature. Now, not only the Unitarians, but the Universalists, too, were influenced by humanist currents. One might even argue that the Universalists put the heart in humanism. At a Universalist church in Boston, the Charles Street Meeting House, Kenneth Patton and a pioneering congregation collected the art and symbols of world religions, developed vast new quantities of liturgical materials, like the reading you just heard, and gathered music from world cultures. Patton and Clinton Lee Scott, the Universalist leader who recruited him to pilot this effort, were among those on the Universalist side of our UU tradition who had fully embraced the philosophy of humanism. Scott's demonstration project for a new universalism began with Patton's arrival in 1949. And the effort to continue something bold, broad, and engaging continued for over 20 years. Several years into it, Patton explained, "The meeting house has one basic and simple idea: to find a religious setting for a religion of one humanity and one world. It is the United Nations idea applied to religion. Our unofficial motto, nothing that is human can be alien to me." Patton was at heart an explorer and an artist. One colleague stumbled upon him in the meeting house one morning, on his knees, painting a mural of the Andromeda Galaxy for the proscenium. He looked like a happy kid building a terrific model airplane. His enthusiasm was contagious. To the humanist scientific worldview, valuing of personal experience, and aspirations of peace and justice for all peoples around the globe, Patton added a keen appreciation of beauty, a deep love of nature, and a singular poetic voice. His nearly 30 published books include volumes of his own poetry and he anthologized an immense amount of humanistic-oriented poetry from around the world as well. Patton described himself as a naturalistic mystic. In contrast to the traditional mystic, who he said seeks to achieve oneness with God, the naturalistic mystic seeks to know his actual and living oneness with nature and with humanity. This orientation was evident in the design of the meeting house, with symbols at the macro scale of the universe at one end, Earth and humanity in the center, and the micro scale of the atom at the opposite end. The awe of the cosmos was evoked by the great nebula in Andromeda, reproduced from astronomical photographs, as you can see here in this picture of the Meeting House Sanctuary. Patton described how the world was symbolized by a large polar projection map of the Earth inlaid in linoleum in the very center of the auditorium. All national boundaries are eliminated, he said, giving the one landmass, the one Earth. The people, being seated in a circle with the map before them, symbolize unity and one world in their very arrangement. At the microcosmic end was a piece designed by a young Boston artist, which represented the atom, the cell, the seed. Minister and scholar David Bumbaugh summed up Patton's work by saying, "It was he who taught a monotone rationalism how to sing. It was he who taught a stumble-footed humanism how to dance. It was he who cried, 'Look,' and taught our eyes to see the glory of the ordinary." I actually did some research on Patton and the Charles Street Meeting House when I was in seminary, and I was struck by how many of the things that they did are staples in UU communities today. I can't say definitively that Patton's religion for one world was the only source of these innovations, but that community may have led the way. They lit a flaming chalice during each service. I did not uncover any earlier source of this practice, superseding the meeting house. Their sanctuary featured prominently a bookcase holding the great books of all the world religions, a vivid honoring of wisdom from many sources. And they may have started the trend in putting together symbols of major faiths into a single location or work of art. I have seen many such installations in 21st century UU churches. And this poster is a collection of some of those that were on display and collected by the Charles Street Meeting House. A side of Patton that may be less remembered was his preaching and activism. He did not hesitate to call out the evils of his day. Colleagues knew him as, quote, "a prophet of the old school, proclaiming doom about one and another kind of societal injustice, most frequently the military-industrial complex." Often, he appealed to the citizen in us to force our nation and the expanding global civilization to eliminate poverty, racism, ethnic rivalry, and warfare. Among the ways that Patton now seems ahead of his time, in the 1940s, he had drafted and publicized a provocative platform of actions that white people in particular could take to help combat racial discrimination. The community at the meeting house responded to their minister's activist orientation. One member of the meeting house recalls, "All types of anti-war, black activist, and later women's rights, feminist, and gay and lesbian groups used our buildings. Often we were an embarrassment to the UUA and conservative Beacon Hill groups at that time." The heart of humanism is this affirmation of the intrinsic dignity, value, and meaning of human life. The heart of humanism is knowing deep in your bones that when the forces of hate and hysteria are amassing, forces that would tear down all the humanistic values we would build up, then the forces of love and reason, of strength found in solidarity with our common humanity, must be marshaled as well. It is up to us to help create the final country that Patton described. And actually, we have an opportunity to participate in just such an action today in Fort Worth. You may have heard about the March for Love, Not Hate, taking place this afternoon. This is a nonpartisan, non-political event organized by leaders from diverse faiths and ethnic backgrounds. And in contrast to the events in Charlottesville and elsewhere, it is intended to be a time of love and healing, to send a message of caring and solidarity. So all are invited to gather at 2 o'clock at the Kennedy Memorial downtown, and a march will begin around 2:30. If you go and you're looking for other UUs, you can find them, me among them, by their West Side t-shirts or the Standing on the Side of Love yellow gear. I suspect that the question, what is the role of humanism in Unitarian Universalism, may have arisen because our tradition continues to evolve and things are not precisely how they used to be. There was a time in some parts of the country, in some of our congregations, when exclusive humanism was the predominant point of view. We always remained theologically diverse, but the tone of worship services was more strongly humanist in many churches. For several decades now, various forms of theism have become more visibly present again, and spiritual language has returned in those places where it was absent to our UU culture. This may make some people nervous, especially those who have had the experience in the past, perhaps in other traditions, of being a beleaguered minority, or being disrespected, or even mistreated for not espousing conventional beliefs. So I want to say very clearly, for anyone who may have this fear, that this is a non-issue in a UU community, and one grounded in our tradition. Because freedom, reason, tolerance, and love, which have been hallmarks of our tradition since their beginnings, remain our guideposts. We are still a people of deeds, not creeds. This remains a place where we value authenticity over conformity. When we sing, "Come, come, whoever you are, come, yet again come," we mean it. Not only are we theologically diverse and likely to remain so, if anything, our diversity of thought and practice is likely to increase further as the creative intermixing of all the religious and spiritual currents available today continues. Indeed, we are seeing that with, for example, a strong Buddhist influence now for many UUs and even UU churches. What we have in common is the affirmation that all 6 of the sources of our living tradition can inform and illumine our lives. And you can find those sources listed in one of the inserts to your order of service. You might notice the one that zeroes in on humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And of course, we share our commitment to the 7 principles that are listed there also, including the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and acceptance of one another and encouragement to grow. We all have room here to keep exploring and even to evolve in our theological understanding over the course of our lives, if that occurs for us, without that meaning that we must change traditions or leave our community. What's more, I believe not only are all of these theological differences here to stay, but I think they're actually a strength. When we engage one another in a spirit of curiosity and respect and mutual enrichment, the variety of viewpoints and life experiences that are present here, including both theistic and non-theistic, both secular and spiritual understandings, these can be a resource to help us grow, even to heal as individuals and as a community. I have heard members of this very congregation speak of having that kind of experience here at Westside and finding value in that diversity. Let us continue to live into this part of the religious tradition that we have inherited, in which we don't have to think alike to love alike, and greater love is what we are really all working towards. In doing so, we will be making an important contribution to helping our nation, too. For this ability to embrace differences as a source of strength, not something to be feared or fought over, is a skill our country is hurting for. The poet and prophet Kenneth Patton goes to the heart of a humanism we still very much need with these words. Give people security and common dreams, and they will find their interrelatedness. Take rivalry and fear and hunger from their midst, and they will make peace with one another. May our minds so widen in understanding and our hearts so widen in love that we may be kin to the people of all nations, that the earth may become a single home for one race of humanity, living together in kinship and peace. May it be so. Amen.